This isolation lift in particular is very important because it is so hard to achieve the shortened position on hamstrings with any other movement. I mean, think about a good morning, think about a deadlift, think about any hip hinge. You're not achieving the full shortened position or contracted position. You're only getting that lengthened bit. And there's two sides of the coin for a reason. I think that you should be hitting each one with a lot of vigor and intensity. So that's why having this variation is so important, in my opinion. One of the biggest roadblocks for leg development is actually fatigue accumulation, which is just a fancy term for saying that a movement may be impairing your ability to fully recover from your hypertrophy training. So I think it's key to really choose exercises strategically in your leg workouts that don't accumulate too much fatigue, but also still deliver a high amount of stimulus. That's really ultimately what you want in any hypertrophic domain, but especially for legs, because I don't think it's any big secret that legs are definitely the movements and the workout that is really going to beat you up. And if you're not careful, it can bleed into the recovery of other body parts like your chest, your arms, etc., etc. So I think that the major impact is just to balance that stimulus to fatigue ratio. And it all starts with choosing the correct exercises. For instance, I'm starting this workout off with a hack squat. And the beautiful thing about a hack squat or a leg press or something along those lines is it removes the core from the movement pattern, and then you can just focus on your legs, and it removes the back and everything. Versus if you were doing like a free weight, like a barbell back squat or something along those lines, then you're gonna have that core stability component. You're gonna be stretched out. It's gonna just involve so many more muscles, including stabilizers and of the like. And you can just try it for yourself. Do a set of barbell back squats and then do a set of hack squats. It's so much easier to really grind out repetitions and really get a huge stimulus with a hack squat versus a back squat. And on top of that, a back squat, you're likely going to need a spotter or something, and you're really going balls to the wall. And we know that you want to be hitting a certain threshold, mainly failure, in order to really trigger that signal for growth. Anyway, let's get into the first set here. I want to be demonstrating kind of some ideas of what a high or a low stimulus to a high stimulus to a low fatigue, ratio workout would look like for a leg day. Oof. I definitely feel safer to go balls to the wall on a hack squat movement. And let me just say that if I'm starting with something like a hack squat, then I may feel more inclined to have a little bit more leeway later on in the workout. For instance, I wouldn't just do a barbell back squat into a barbell deadlift, into a barbell hip thrust. That would be too much stimulus, too much fatigue, way too much fatigue. But if I were to do something like this, like a machine hack squat, and then get into a barbell RDL, which I'm strongly considering, that's kind of like a good balance where one is providing great stimulus but not too much fatigue, and the next one has both in spades, but you can get away with it because you sacrifice with the first lift. You know what I mean? It's all about balance. Another way that you can reliably reduce fatigue, which I actually did this workout, is you can make sure that you are optimally warmed up. So doing some dynamic warm-up drills, maybe some like hip external rotation, some knee kicks, butt kicks, some high knees, stuff of that sort. Maybe even walking on the treadmill for a little bit just to get the blood flowing, just get your legs a little bit warmed up. And then this is crucial. Make sure that you are performing enough warm-up sets for your first lift. So I did about 4 or 5 warm-up sets before initiating my first working set on this. And I think that with other body parts, you can get away with skipping the dynamic warm-up, doing less warm-up sets, and you would probably be totally fine unless you have elite level strength or something. But for 99.9% of the population, they're gonna need a hefty warm-up regimen before they actually start squatting. Now, if you were to start with something like a single joint movement, maybe like a leg extension or leg curl, the warm-ups wouldn't need to be that vigorous, but I always recommend warming up a lot before you do squats or deadlifts of any kind. Just because even if you do it where it's more in a stable machine like this instead of a free weight option, you're still going to be paying the price if you're not adequately warmed up. Woo. Now, I believe that it is essential to get a complete balance of leg development. You don't just want to be focusing on your quads, you don't just want to be focusing on your glutes, your hamstrings, and just totally disregard everything else. You definitely want a full balance across the week, and I think that with every body part, but especially legs because they're so flex. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have like a quad focused day or a glute focused day or a hamstring focused day. I just think that it's important to spread out everything evenly. And in fact, having days that are more focused on one aspect of training or a given muscle group in the leg over the others may be a key way in order to reduce fatigue, because after all, when you're doing squats, you're working your glutes. When you're doing an RDL, which I'm about to perform, you're working your glutes and your hamstrings and your quads. So you're still getting that frequency aspect, but just keep in mind that volume and intensity need to be evenly distributed as well. You want to be hitting around 15 to 20 sets a week if you're, an intermediate or advanced. If you're a beginner, you can get away with anything, but that's just something to think about when you are trying to plan out your leg days for the most appropriate fatigue spread, If I were to have started on a more fatiguing exercise rather than hack squats, maybe I did like a barbell back squat, then I probably would opt for a dumbbell variation of this instead of a barbell, or even like a Smith machine variation. But since I did hack squats and they're so stable and easy to perform to a high degree, I'm opting to go a little bit harder and do a barbell variation for this lift. The primary principle to keep in mind when you are trying to achieve a balanced look for your legs is just to make sure that you are including all the major movement patterns. So, a deadlift of a sort would include a hip hinge. So you want something like that. That could be good morning, a deadlift RDL, anything that's involving a hip hinge. Additionally, you want a squatting movement pattern, because that is just a fantastic movement pattern for the whole lower body. And then that kind of covers the basis of a leg press. You may want a leg press movement just for some additional quad growth without that additional fatigue. And then beyond that, probably a knee extension exercise, because that'll work the vastus lateralis to a large degree, which doesn't really happen on a squat movement pattern. And then you probably want some sort of hamstring curl, because when you're doing deadlifts and stuff, you're not really getting the peak contraction. It's mainly working in a lengthened position instead of the shortened. And I think that those are probably all your main movement patterns. And then additionally, you want some plantar flexion and whatnot, just so that you can get some calf work, because that's going to be raising your heel. So if you can hit all those bases and then really juggle between doing like a machine, which would be less of a fatigue, and then maybe doing a barbell, which will be more of a fatigue, and just trying to balance and acrobat that throughout your schedule, that is going to be ideal. And you'll be definitely reaping some rewards if you can manage all those variables alongside volume and intensity optimally. Isolation lifts can be a fantastic way in order to increase the stimulus while keeping the fatigue at bay. And the reason for that is because whenever you're doing a compound lift that is using at least 2 joints or more, think of a squat, you're using your hip joint and your knee joint in conjunction in order to press the weight, or press you away from the ground in that case. Versus something like a hamstring curl here, you're only really using the knee joint. You're actually enacting knee flexion by tugging on your hamstring, or using your hamstrings to tug on your bones and trigger that knee flexion. And therefore, it's taking out a lot of muscle groups, so you can just focus into that one muscle group at hand. So I think that it's just a brilliant way in order to add a lot of stimulus and really get that trigger for protein synthesis and for hypertrophy going without eating into your recovery capacity. You can also do a lot of sets without totally destroying yourself, which is great too.
And I love to put them at the end of the workout since they are easier. And the compound lifts in the beginning, like the squats and the deadlift I just did, require more effort. And therefore, I think that they should be trained while you are freshest. Exercise could be traded out with something like a Nordic curl. However, a Nordic curl, since it is a calisthenic movement by trade, it is going to be a lot more fatiguing just because you are lifting your whole entire body weight. So that can be a real trigger. And it's also eccentrically based, which causes more muscle damage. So use that exercise with caution if your primary goal is hypertrophy. That's why I tend to resort to this exercise or the prone variation. I think that this isolation lift in particular is very important because it is so hard to achieve the shortened position on hamstrings with any other movement. I mean, think about a good morning, think about a deadlift, think about any hip hinge. You're not achieving the full shortened position or contracted position. You're only getting that lengthened bit. And there's two sides of the coin for a reason. I think that you should be hitting each one with a lot of vigor and intensity. So that's why having this variation is so important, in my opinion. And then again, it doesn't just have to be this particular machine. You could do other variations just as long as you are achieving a great deal of knee flexion. Then you'll be working the hamstrings in that shortened position. I also believe that the quads need a similar stimulus. So getting some knee extension isolatory work is very important as well, because the vastus lateralis is not hit very much on a squat just based off of you're not achieving the knee flexion or knee extension in this regard. So I think it's important to include this as well. Then again, you're also getting a high amount of stimulus for a low amount of fatigue. So it's really win-win, as long as it doesn't bother your knees or something. If you want to sub this exercise out, maybe you don't have it in your gym or something, then a reverse Nordic, so just doing the Nordic curl but in reverse, is a great substitution because you are still enacting that full knee extension, which you need to do in order to achieve this type of movement pattern. However, that for the same reasons why the Nordic curl isn't the best substitution in my opinion for hypertrophy's sake alone, I think that the reverse Nordic is of the similar I'm of a similar opinion for that exercise as well, for the same reasons. You could also do something like a sissy squat where you get like a huge knee extension at the bottom. And that could be a great substitution as well, but that is more of a compound lift, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, in order to achieve that perfectly balanced, symmetrical look and really get everything in the lower body, some plantar flexion is required as well. So doing some calf movements, I prefer the standing one because it hits both the gastroc and the soleates versus the seated only hits the soleates, not the gastroc. So if you are coming to that decision whether you want to do the seated or the standing, definitely go with the standing every time, in my opinion. But it's up to you. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. This was all about how to really maximize the stimulus while decreasing the fatigue on leg days, because I know that it can be rather tricky with leg days. See ya.